The power of positive thinking. In a small temple hidden among the bamboo mountains lived a young monk named Ren. He was quiet, observant, and often sat meditating until the last ray of sunlight dissolved among the leaves. Despite his dedication, his face carried a persistent cloud of doubt. "Master," he asked one afternoon while sweeping the stone path, "why do some thoughts make me feel as light as a feather, while others bind me like chains?" Master Soren, an elder with deep eyes, paused. Then, without answering, he slowly walked toward the garden and pulled a dry weed from the ground. "Come, plant this seed," he said, handing Ren a tiny black seed. "But this is dead," Ren asked, puzzled. "Just plant it," the master replied with a serene smile. Ren obeyed. He dug a small hole, buried the seed, and watered the earth with fresh water from the spring. "Now," said Soren, "every morning, come here and speak to the seed as if it were already blooming. But let your words come not just from your mouth, but from your heart." Ren bowed, still not fully understanding, and so began his daily ritual. Day after day, he spoke tenderly to the patch of earth, imagining a flower growing from the invisible. What Ren didn't know was that the seed was not a plant. It was himself. Every dawn, Ren walked barefoot to the spot where he had planted the seed. He would sit silently, breathe deeply, and then begin to speak. "I know you're growing down there," he would say softly. "Even though I can't see you, I feel your strength breaking through the darkness." Days turned into weeks, and the ground remained unchanged. Nothing sprouted. Some monks began whispering among themselves, wondering why Ren spoke alone to an empty patch of earth. But he remained unmoved. Something inside him had been ignited. Over time, his words were no longer just for the seed. They were for himself, for that forgotten part of his soul that also needed to bloom. He began to speak of gratitude, hope, and beauty, even when there were no visible signs of change. "Today the sky is overcast, but the seed is still alive. Like my faith," he murmured. "Not because I see the sun, but because I know it exists." One day, as he spoke, he felt something was different. Not in the earth, but inside himself. He no longer waited for a plant to bloom. He waited for himself to bloom, and the miracle slowly began. Ren began to notice small changes in his daily life. He no longer woke up feeling heavy, nor dragged gray thoughts like shadows clinging to his steps. He felt lighter, more present. The words he spoke each morning to the seed, unknowingly, were watering his mind. "You are strong," he would say to the ground. "Even if no one sees it, you are growing." And that very phrase echoed within his heart. The other monks, intrigued, started watching him more closely. The boy who used to be withdrawn and doubtful now smiled with his eyes and listened with a calm that enveloped. His silence was not emptiness. It was peace. One afternoon, Master Soren approached him while he meditated under a cherry tree. "What have you learned from that seed that has not yet sprouted?" he asked softly. Ren opened his eyes without surprise. "That not all blossoming is visible, but it can be felt," he answered. "That when I care for what I think, I am caring for who I am. The flower has not yet appeared in the earth, but it has bloomed within me." The master nodded slowly. "The power of positive thinking is not about turning the world into what you want," he said. "It is about turning your gaze into one that can see the invisible." The next day, while the others gathered firewood or prepared rice, Ren walked to the garden with a serene smile. He no longer needed to speak to the seed. Simply being with it was enough. His presence alone sufficed. A warm breeze brushed his face as he sat down, and for the first time, instead of words, he let silence speak for him. He closed his eyes and felt how positive thoughts were no longer an effort but a natural state. "Thank you," he thought silently. "Thank you for teaching me that the invisible is the most real." And then he remembered something the master had said long ago. "Where you put your attention, you put your energy. Where you put your energy, you create life." He understood then that his mind, like the garden, could be filled with weeds if left uncultivated. Judgment, doubt, complaint were seeds too. But now Ren chose what he wanted to plant, not to deny reality, but to accompany it with light. And it was right then, in that moment of silent gratitude, that a small green sprout peeked through the soil. It was neither a lush flower nor a majestic plant. It was just a fragile line of life, trembling in the wind. But in it, Ren saw reflected his entire journey. Ren looked at the small sprout as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. Not for what it was, but for all that it represented. There was no magic in that green leaf, no apparent miracle. Only perseverance, faith, and presence. Master Soren appeared behind him, his steps so light that the dry leaves barely crunched. "What do you see?" he asked. Ren smiled without taking his eyes off the sprout. "I see a part of myself that chose not to give up. A thought that blossomed." Soren crouched beside him and touched the damp earth. "That is the power of positive thinking, Ren. It's not about denying the stones on the path, but about seeing that, even with them, you can keep walking. It's knowing that even when the world is gray, you can be the color." The young monk nodded silently. No more words were needed. The sprout was enough. From that day on, Ren changed the way he walked through the temple. Every step carried intention, every gesture a seed. He discovered that every kind thought he planted in another returned to him like a flower that asked no permission to grow. And he understood that positive thinking was not a happy idea. It was a way of life. The rumor of the sprout began to spread among the monks, not because of its size, which remained small, but because of the visible change in Ren. Some approached out of curiosity, others out of need. One by one, they began to ask him what he did there every day. Ren did not speak with grandeur. He simply shared what he had learned. "Before, my thoughts were like dark clouds that kept me from seeing the sky. But I learned to choose, not to fight the clouds, but to make space for the light." Soon, other monks started coming to the garden, not to observe the sprout, but to sit in silence, reflecting on their own inner seeds. One spoke with the wind, another with a rock, another simply with their breath. The garden became a sacred place, not because something special happened there, but because there each person remembered they could bloom. Soren, with a slight smile, watched it all from afar. He knew that one single seed had changed many gardens, and not because of the flower, but because of the faith that came before it. Ren, for his part, no longer sought answers. He had understood that the right question was not, "When will I bloom?" but, "Am I cultivating my garden with love today?" As time passed, Ren understood something even deeper. Not every day was bright, nor every thought sweet. Sometimes he awoke with a heavy heart, or doubts would return whispering old fears. But now he knew what to do. He did not run away. He did not blame himself. He simply returned to his garden. He sat before the sprout, which now had small, sturdy leaves, and breathed calmly. "Today is hard," he said softly, "but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Even the rain nourishes the roots." Thus he learned that positive thinking was not a forced smile, nor a denial of pain. It was a gentle choice, a serene trust repeated day after day. "This too shall pass, and when it does, I will have grown." One morning, seeing him like this, Master Soren said, "You have understood the art of thought as a gardener understands the seasons. You do not rush the flower. You only trust the seed." and Ren, without a word, bowed his head. He knew that this garden, his mind and spirit, was already fertile, because he had learned to tend the invisible, and the invisible was what blossomed most. The sprout, which had once been barely a whisper in the earth, now stood strong and vibrant. Its leaves, bright and sturdy, celebrated the hidden strength that had carried it. Ren knelt before the plant, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for showing me that the most powerful things bloom in the silence of the mind." Master Soren appeared beside him, placing a warm hand on his shoulder. "You have learned well, Ren," he said softly. "Positive thinking is not a magic trick, but a daily practice, as simple and profound as watering a seed with attention." Ren looked over the entire garden, where every corner bore the mark of his own transformation. He knew then that every seed planted in his heart, every kind word, every longing for light, would bear fruit, even if the world did not notice. He walked slowly, letting the breeze touch his face, carrying with it the promise of new sprouts. In himself, in others, and in every gesture born of serene faith. And as the sun leaned low, Ren understood the final lesson. The power of positive thinking does not lie in changing the universe, but in quietly cultivating the seed of one's own peace.